Happy Chess Day, everybody, and welcome to my new YouTube channel. Here on this channel, we're going to cover the biggest events in the chess world, but also some hidden gems, some educational tidbits, some moves that may not get the shine of those top-level players, but still are every bit as interesting. So I hope you enjoy the ride. This is just the beginning, and let's dive right into the 2025 FIDE Grand Swiss in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, because round one was super exciting. In this particular game, we had the student become the grandmaster. Yes, Divya Deshmukh, the 2025 Women's World Cup champion, takes on someone who helped her become the champion there in Abhimanyu Puranik. The GM from India, he was the collaborator, now he's the opponent. And in this game, we had what looked to be like a normal start, where the pawns were exchanged, the bishops come out, everything seems normal until this move pawn to f3. So what's the point? Well, a pawn 3 squares away from a knight dominates that knight. The knight on f6, it can't easily jump forward because that pawn restricts its forward progress. The knight says, I'm going to go to the rim, I'm not dim, and I attack your bishop. The bishop takes the knight on b8, the undeveloped piece, the rook recaptures, and here we have a fork. If your bishop moves, you lose the knight. If the knight moves, you lose the bishop. So it seems like black has made a mistake, except for the fact that there's this check on h4 and there is no piece for white to block the check. That means the king must move and remain in the center. Now where to move? Don't go forward because that allows the check, and typically we don't want to give our opponents checks against our king, and here it comes with grave effect because after pawn takes knight, the rook is captured in the corner. Yes, a bishop is hanging in. Once you take it, unfortunately you lose this knight over here. Black has a rook, white has a knight, rooks are worth 5, knights are worth 3, black is ahead. So in the game, we didn't have that kind of mistake. We instead saw king go to d2. And in this one, what we see is this knight on h1 is actually trapped. So black does have that extra rook for just this knight, but that knight in the corner is not getting out because knight f2 is met with queen to e1. A little slide over there, and the queen on h4 is undefended, which means the knight can't successfully move, which means you're going to lose that piece in the next turn as there are 2 white attackers and only 1 black defender. The bishop comes out, black castles, and white takes this knight in the corner. And here is the critical moment of the game, I would say, because white still was ahead at later points, but it allowed black to get some quick activity. And had Divya played this move pawn to f4, it's very hard to see how black drums up serious counterplay against this white king in the center. Because one of the critical ideas is to play this move pawn to c5, but you're not going to successfully get that with all of white's pieces staring at black's pawn on d5. You would lose that pawn, and white would be able to shore up her center. Just to show you what that looks like in many of these positions, is after pawn takes pawn, white plays e4, and this looks very clearly good for white. The knight stops this bishop from checking in either direction. You have both these knights, in fact, covering these squares, and so white is saying, I'm safe in the center, I have more material. 2 knights versus a rook, the knights are more valuable, especially in a position like this. So f4 would have perhaps limited black's responses, options available to him, and this goes to show what the critical distinction of how Puranik played and what could have happened. A little wrinkle a few turns ago, that when black played bishop d6, perhaps he played this move too quickly. Bishop b4 first, actually, it carries a pretty big punch, because if we continue with what happened in the game, black castles, the knight is lost. Now there's this move c5 very quickly. This pawn on d5 is not under attack. Well, as hard as I try, I can't take this pawn on d5 because there's a pin here. So that allows black to strike in the center very quickly. Just to show you how games can end in a hurry, d4 happens. All right, I'll take that too. In comes the queen, and we see the problems are only beginning for the white king because there's too many black pieces. Just to maybe make this as clear as possible, that in a position like this, I mean, there's a rook going to come to e1, the rook can come to e2, excuse me, a rook coming to d2, and you see that the rooks just control the open files, and there are all sorts of checks against this poor white king. So why this move bishop to b4 is so important is, again, it stops this d5 pawn from being captured on some of the critical lines, and if white plays a3, and the black bishop now backs up, it looks like we have the same position. And just to continue and show you how it's not the same position, here instead of going for c5, which once again hangs this d5 pawn, we do not want to lose that very important central pawn, we use this pawn a3. White seems to have gained a free turn from the game continuation, but not all moves are helpful for your side. In fact, this creates a hook, and a hook is great when it's the movie starring Robin Williams. Not so good in this position because black uses that hook to their advantage, playing b4 next. The rook on b8 is perfectly placed here to launch an attack, and what white would want more than anything is to push the pawn back to a2. You don't have that here, unfortunately, and that means that black will get some serious play against that white king. So these little nuances, they make all the difference in the world. In this game, black still won, but this kind of idea with b5, b4 would have been to black's liking in the game. We saw just the game continue, and black did have options to play c5 because white didn't stop him from doing that. And in fact, we had the move c5 here. The game got very messy. It still was fine for white, but unfortunately for Divya, she ended up losing, and she could have stopped black's play before it even began. So that was just one game that I noticed in the first round. We had so many other fun, spectacular moments. So let's dive to the next game between Dardha and Yangyi. And this is the type of game that people often don't notice. The game ended in a draw. That's the final result. And the final position itself was one where you're like, okay, they made a draw. Don't need to look through it. But the game was fascinating. And I'm going to breeze through the opening because it was a Sicilian. Black plays in this structure, giving up control of the dark squares for the moment, but then in a few turns, just covering all of his bases. You see that these pawns on the 6th rank cover key squares, no forward access for the white knight, at least not for now. And then in a couple turns, we see the game change completely after knight to e5, king goes to h1, and f4. So the whole point of this is to give black the pair of bishops. That's typically a great thing. Top level grandmasters love the pair of bishops, especially on an open board, but this board isn't so open, is it? Black has these pawns that are actually blunting the scope of these bishops. This bishop stares into its own e-pawn. This bishop stares into its own pawn and knight. So the bishops, they don't get to flex their muscles. They don't have the ability to see the open board. And white's pawns, this kind of Rotzi-bind structure, say d5 will be hard to play. b5 will be hard to play because all of white's pieces stare in those directions. And so I just want to note how, for now, black's pawn push is not so easy to make work. And after queen g3 over here, we start to see the makings of an attack. If you give white one free turn, it could be game over. So let's say I make some kind of move like h6, some little teeny move. You see the evaluation bar go all the way up. Take a second for yourself. Try to figure out what's available here and why the engine says white is completely winning. And now that I've given you a little bit of time, knight f5. This is a typical Sicilian idea. Knight to f5. Once that knight is captured, other knight into d5, and you may say, so what? This knight can capture, but that's what this bishop is doing. Unlike that black bishop on e7 staring at its own pieces, this bishop stares through the open board towards a checkmating square. The queen's under attack. If you move the queen, you lose the bishop, you lose the knight. All these things are hanging, and if you take, there is checkmate. So queen g3 actually has a very direct threat. It may not be immediately noticeable, but knight f5 followed by knight to d5. So Yangyi says, all right, I'm not going to allow that to happen. Let me go after your queen. We have a dance. And for most people, they may be expecting a draw happen. They just made a 3-time repetition. That's what happens when the same position is reached on 3 occasions. The game ends in a draw. But Dardha had other ideas. He says, I've got more space. I control b5, I control d5, I control all of these squares in the center and the breakpoints for black. So here comes g4. And this is a huge moment in this game because he says, I'm playing on, I'm going for it. d5 is the type of move you want to play, but it does look scary to start allowing white to expand more in the center. I already mentioned knight f5 and knight d5 type of ideas. They're all in the air. So here, queen c5 was played going after this knight, and many of us, myself included, would say, okay, let me do something to protect that knight. A rook to d1, or move the knight, say this knight to e2, to open up this bishop to defend this knight and see all the way into the black position. Not Dardha. g5. And that move is a great move from white. Queen takes knight. Rook d1, intermezzo. No, he didn't want to take that knight right away. He wanted to challenge black as much as possible before grabbing that knight. The queen goes to c5. Now it's taken. Bishop takes. And this is why he put the queen on the square that he forced it to. Knight a4, a tempo shot. Now I'm going to take your bishop and expose the black king. And here we see the king get open. And this is the type of move that without an engine, you're like, whoa, what a move from white. And then the engine quickly says, nah, that's not good. And what white should have done here is perhaps play this move pawn to f5. That's one of the ideas in these types of positions. It threatens a check here, going after this pawn on d6. But the game is super complex. Black will slide the king, try to get the rook at some point if you can to the g8 square, although this f6 pawn is tender. White should be better because white controls the punches. This knight will come back into the center, but if you're not quick, white did give up a pawn for this initiative. So instead, rook d5 was played. A really fantastic move to see, even if it can be fantastically bad. This rook was captured, queen g3 check, and this was the whole point. Like, let's get my queen all the way over here to go for the attack, and the black queen is out of play. So going for the direct shot against the black king. And earlier, just to show you the difference, why the rook came d5, if you try this, you end up losing the game because the pawn e4 is hanging, and it's the white king that's attacked first. You'll see that very quickly. A rook comes to g8 once the king moves, and you're just going to get checkmated. So, or give up your queen to avoid getting checkmated, and that doesn't really help. So that's why the rook came to d5, blocking the black queen's path. We see a check, the queen come out, and here the game this is what I'm talking about. The game just ends in a draw by a repetition, back and forth, back and forth. So that looks like nothing. But even a few turns ago, this defense here from black, it looked like everything, controlled, make a draw. But right at this moment, I was like, why in the world was black better? And I didn't see it right away, but I had the evaluation bar to the side. And there's a bizarre idea. Typically, you defend your king by bringing more forces around it. So a move like rook g8 comes to mind, but that move fails because queen takes f6 is check. You have only one legal way to defend your king by blocking, and then this rook is hanging. That rook on the 8th rank was needing to defend it. So that doesn't work because now you're losing material. And this queen can go back and forth. This pawn on d5 will be hanging. White will be ahead by a couple pawns. So that doesn't work. And so you don't have rook g8. Bishop g4, the whole point was to distract white's forces to close down the open g file. And then there's one other move. Bishop f5, which is, just unheard of. A move that you have to be in the best tactical shape to spot because you were just giving up your bishop for free. But in giving up your bishop, you were trying to expose the white king on the diagonal. Because anytime that diagonal is opened up, doesn't matter if you take or push the pawn, that the king is open, here comes a check, here comes a rook, here comes another rook to the open file. This king is not escaping. You simply have to give up your queen to avoid checkmate. So that's the whole point of a move like bishop to f5. A really wild sequence here. And the game, it could continue with a check. Rook g1 is now met with bishop to g6, blocking the checkmate. And if you take on f5 with the queen, it gives black just enough time to play. What, everybody? What is black going to play here? According to Ben Feingold, you're never supposed to play it, but here you absolutely must. f6, because after the check on g1, the king slides to h8, you've run out of checks. And black is the one ahead material, because white was the one who sacrificed a rook for nothing on that square d5. So bishop f5 would have been a move that turned the game in black's favor. It's a ridiculous ask of people at the board when they have so much pressure on their shoulders, but bishop to f5, just one more time for everybody, then in this position here, bishop g4 was played to distract white's pieces again, not to allow the black king to get attacked, but the move bishop f5 was actually one better because black would have successfully forced white's pieces away from the checkmate. Really cool move, bishop f5, bishop g4, second best, the only other move that survives, and again, this kind of idea, rook g1 going for the mate, protected, and h3 trying to go after the pin piece. You see the evaluation still, it's level, and the reason why is that if you try and go and take this piece, you actually lose the game, because once this check happens, you can see that black can actually close the g file. You were trying to break it open to go for the black king, not happening, and black is ahead by too much material with a queen that's going to help defend the black king. So really cool stuff. The game ended in a draw. Just one more time for everybody. The rook sacrificed itself for this bishop. Now you can't stop these checks, and the king can only go on the g file, and back and forth we go. The game ends in a draw. So another cool game, one that you may not have seen yourselves, but started with a bind, then white went for more for the initiative, and then maybe got a little overzealous with the rook sacrifice, but ultimately the game ends with the point being split. One more game look at in the Grand Swiss, where I would say that G4, not overzealous, great decision from Frederik Svane, the German Grandmaster, and he was playing a very strong opponent, but one that he outrates by 150, 160 rating points. So here Knight C4 was played, and I just want to highlight this critical moment that turned the game in White's favor. That you can see the evaluation actually says that Black is doing okay. And the hard part about positions like this is when your pawn is under attack on b7, in addition to White trying to steam forward on the king side. It's like, you want to defend, but you know that you don't have all the time in the world. And a move like b5, it does look good, because you are trying to maybe kick this knight out of c3, carve out all the light squares for your bishop. You're the only one with the light square bishop. But there's this issue of g5, and now what? That's the big question, is because this very strong bishop would be useful on the a8, h1 diagonal, trying to go for checkmate. Knight d5 has a tactical flaw. Can you spot it? It looks like the move you want to play, putting your steed in the center, just trying to maybe trade a few pieces to take over some of the key squares. But knights are the trickiest pieces on the board, and here, knight to c6 comes into play, hitting the queen. The queen steps up to keep the knight defended, and after knight takes d5, no matter which knight you take, you're going to end up forked on e7. So if you take this knight, it immediately happens. Oops, there goes your queen. That's check to both your king and your queen. That's bad news. Sorry, went back a little far. Here, if knight d5, knight c6, all this happens, well, what do? You sacrifice your queen to then do the same exact fork trick. And so always look to see where your enemy king is. If it's in distance of your knight and another piece, you may successfully find yourself winning the game due to a fork. So instead of all this, he was afraid that his knight, if b5, g5, the knight would end up on a square like h5. Not great. You don't want your knight in the rim. The computer may hold this game, but humans struggle with knights sidelined with no path back in. So instead, we saw the move knight to d7, trying to trade off White's great piece. And here, White claimed all the space on the board. f5 comes, d5 next. This bishop. What bishops? They look like tall pawns staring at all of nothing. And White's forces continue going. And one last idea that I wanted to mention was here at this stage, the evaluation was all the way up. And when I first looked at this game, I didn't have the moves, I just had the number. And I was like, what is happening here? And this is such a nasty idea. Pawn takes g6. Simple chess. Why would I do that? Why would I release the tension? And the reason why is that the pawn takes g6. If you could, you want to play pawn to e6, trapping this bishop. But I'm sorry, what? That square is under control, so if I push my pawn, it's going to be captured. And then you realize, this pawn is pinned. That's a hanging bishop on f7. Can't get away with that. Uh-oh. So the queen's under attack. I got to move the queen then, right? If queen takes here, that queen gets trapped in the center of the board. This is not something you see very often, that in the exact middle of the board, that queen is actually a bad piece, has no safe squares to go to. You're giving up your queen or some other piece maybe, but you're going to be down too much material with an exposed king as well. So that's why this idea works, is pawn takes g6 actually just wins the game on the spot. So if pawn takes doesn't work, what about bishop takes? h5, bishop back, and once again e5. The queen remains trapped, and the pawn can't capture back. So it was a really cool moment where I was confused by, like, how could this be so winning for White? I see the spatial advantage. I see all the pluses in the position. Black's bishops aren't doing anything. But to know there was a game-ending tactic, in this particular game it didn't matter, but the next one it might. So I just wanted to show that. Well, speaking of game-ending tactics and needing to find them, over in the Women's Grand Swiss, we had this game between Carissa Yip, who's on the rise, scoring another Grandmaster norm at the Cairns Cup in St. Louis. She won that tournament. Her rating is up near 2460. She's clearly ascending in the chess world. And Aline Robers is a very talented player, international master from the Netherlands, but she's seen her rating fluctuate quite a bit. And in this game, you see that White has 1 minute on the clock. So Carissa, she's doing her best to go after the black forces, in particular, it's a king on h6. So if you can give it one check, it may be nearing its demise. And knight e3 was a good start, but unfortunately, she played knight to d5, and this is what happens when you're in time trouble. She made that move with 6 seconds on her clock. is you see a way, your queen is trapped, you don't want to give up material, so you think that, okay, let's see what happened in the game. I get your queen after you got mine, and all right, now black is up a couple pawns. Maybe I can hold this game. No, she couldn't. She's down an outside passer, and black has a pair of bishops and an opening board. So that didn't work out. But at this moment, she had to give up the rook for the bishop. And then what she didn't see was like this hidden trick that she had available. And it's actually a geometrical pattern. It, of course, is bishop takes h5. I say of course as if this is obvious. No, I mean, there has to be some idea going after the black king. And if you take with the pawn, the problem is after knight f5 check and the king goes here, well, you're running out of defensive forces, and that last piece comes into the attack, and that's a problem for the black king. That you just bring in the last bit of artillery, and the king is on its last legs. So after bishop takes h5, you think, okay, I can't take with, rook takes first, rook takes back, and then bishop takes h5. We're not giving free queens in this house. That the king could take on h5, and this is where the geometry is important. That any check could be blocked by this bishop, and that is true. Legally, that is true. That if the check comes in, bishop blocks it, I check here, the king goes, and you're like, okay, do I have enough checks? Is this going to work out for me? The king may end up snaking away somewhere if I'm not careful, just to show you like how that could look. Like, let's say you take here, and the king slides f3, you're like, oh, wait, where's the checkmate? Do I have enough? Yeah, white is winning. You'll move the knight, bring the queen back, all that good stuff. But I did this on purpose. I went quickly, because at this moment, after bishop takes h5, king takes queen h7 check, you don't have bishop h6. Because this bishop was in the path, stopping the white queen from taking the black one. So this bishop could not block the check, and that means that black's defensive ideas are running out very quickly. And if the king moves to g5, it's forced checkmate. The king goes to f4, good for you. This queen takes here, and I'm going to checkmate you one of these ways here. Like, there's all sorts of checks against this king leading to mate. I actually don't think you can legally stop queen f5. Like, pre-move queen f5, it's mate. So that's game over. So this idea with rook takes e6 takes and bishop takes h5, when you're in time trouble, you sometimes see ghosts. You think, oh, maybe the queen is still trapped back here, but no, this rook needs a defender. By taking the h5 pawn, you also open up knight g4 check, another important check to force that king out of its shell. So this would have been winning for Carissa Yip, but she didn't have enough time. And, well, that game, it ended up going Aline Rober's way, a hard-fought battle. So fun stuff in the first round of the FIDE Grand Swiss and Women's Grand Swiss. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will do more recaps just like this, dive into some of the details that may have been missed, but please leave comments about your own favorite games, what you'd like to see, and it's just the start of something that I hope will be enjoyable to you all. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back for our next video tomorrow, so stay tuned.